Right in front of it. So yeah.
I'm Jim Murowchick.
Oh, no.
I've seen you on BB Chromebook. Yes, and I'm also friends of Lindy Griffith.
So, welcome everybody. I'm excited that we're here today because I was very much a part of getting this museum moved over here. When Bob Simmons came to suggest the idea of moving it here into the library, because when they were building the plaster building across the street, they had to move the Geosciences Museum, which was literally down a dark hallway and hard to find and didn't get a lot of traffic. And Jim Murowchick worked together on ideas on where in the building and how much space and all of that, along with, of course, the architects. And it's just so exciting having it here. It's truly a gem to have in the library. And Jim, I'm going to let you take it away. We were going to have Dick Gentili giving this, but I know
Dick,
it's not in.
Dick had something come up and couldn't be here, so last minute. Dick and I are kind of the main curators for the museum. Dick takes care of the fossil stuff. I take care of the rock and mineral stuff. And so it was no problem. Dick called, but we were just thrilled to be over here. I was telling Dee and Karen before we went downstairs and found you guys. I've been in here where students have come by and they don't realize I'm in there, and I hear their comments and they go, "Oh, this is my favorite place on campus. And, I love studying in here." And I found students sitting on the floor back in the back row studying because it's quiet and interesting environment and so on. And I often get international students coming in and asking, "Do you have any minerals from my country?" And so we'll look around and see if we can find something. So it's a lot of fun being here. But about, I think it was, well, we're still in 2021, so I think earlier this year, not back at the beginning of the year, this meteorite was on display at the Kansas City Gem and Mineral Show, and it ended up being donated to our museum here. We knew the owners of it, and Dick Gentile made arrangements to have it, to acquire it and have it donated here. And this is what's called an iron meteorite, specifically an octahedrite. And this is from a major fall in northern Argentina. And let me just give you a little background on it. This is one of the pieces from the Campo de Cielo meteorite fall, and the area is about 620 miles northwest of Buenos Aires, Argentina. The crater field itself is about a little under 2 miles by almost 12 miles, and contains at least 26 individual craters. The largest of these is about a little under 400 feet by 300 feet. And the age of the craters is estimated to be about 4,000 to 5,000 years, and that was based on carbon-14 dating of wood that was found underneath the pieces in the impact crater. Now the meteorite itself is not that old. The meteorite is about, the age of the solar system, about 4.5 billion years old, or 4.6 billion years old. But the fall itself was recent enough, maybe a couple thousand years BC, that there were people in the area, and there were legends among the indigenous people saying that this fell from the sky. So there might have actually been witnesses to this, which is interesting because, this would have been a bit smaller fall because it broke up in the atmosphere. The individual pieces came down, but if you compare it with similar material hitting the earth in southern Arizona with a meteor crater, that fall, total energy released was the equivalent of about 6 megatons, and the impact itself was about 2.5 megatons. And it produced a crater, a much larger crater than any of these down in Argentina, but it produced a crater that was nearly a mile across and several hundred feet deep. But it broke up in the atmosphere And there's a theory called pancake theory, where it breaks up and now you have a pancake-shaped mass of bodies that come in and hit the ground. And so there really weren't any large pieces of your crater, but there are many, many, many small pieces of iron at Meteor Crater. Here, it was a smaller body. Probably the total mass of the body was maybe 60 tons, something like that. About half of it burned up in the atmosphere on the way in, and it probably broke up in the atmosphere. And they think it broke up because it contains a lot of inclusions in the iron. And so these might have made it a little bit more brittle than if it had been a pure iron. I'm about ready to just go ahead and take this off. It keeps coming down. But so it spread out over an area. It came in at an angle, so the strewn field is very long and elliptical, again about a few miles wide by about 12 miles long, and there are pieces found on downstream as far as 60 miles. And so this often happens when a piece breaks up before it enters, and remember the Earth is turning, so the things behind end up hitting a different position. The initial impact site is here, and the Earth turns, and you keep just making a line of dots, a line of impact sites. And so that's what's happened with this. The original masses were reported in 1576, even though they were already well known to the Aboriginal inhabitants, who used some of the iron in weapons. But the Spanish investigators that went in took some pieces. They sent them back to Spain and had them analyzed, and the records were recorded and tucked away. It was regarded as being very high purity iron and so on, and then everybody forgot about it. And then, so that was 1576, and it wasn't until, I guess the governor of the province in northern Argentina at that time commissioned the military to search for a huge mass of iron that the natives had reported. And so they got the piece and had it analyzed, and it wasn't until 1774, so nearly 200 years later, that Don Bartolome Francisco de Maguna rediscovered the iron mass, and he called it Mason de Fierro, or Table of Iron. And Maguna thought that the mass was the tip of an iron vein, so they were thought to be on to, you know, a good source of iron for Spain. And then the next expedition by Ruben de Solis in 1783 used explosives to clear the ground around the mass and found that it was probably just a single stone. And they estimated the mass at 15 tons, and they abandoned it as worthless. That's just not enough iron to put a lot of effort into digging up. Also, you can't blow up iron or native metal things because they're just too ductile. They have to be cut or sawn, so you have to use special mining techniques to recover this stuff. And so to do all that for 15 tons worth of metal wasn't worth the effort. Maguna, Ruben de Solis collected samples, and he sent it to the Royal Society of London, published his report. I think this would have been in, again, 1783. And those samples were later analyzed in like 1962, and they're found to contain about 90% iron, 10% nickel, and that at that point they assigned this to meteoric origin, not anything else. Now, I think it was de Solis did not believe that these fell out of the sky. He thought that it got there from eruption from a volcano. This is well over 100 miles from the nearest volcano. So I'm not sure where he got that idea. I mean, there's some way to the west in the Andes, but this is a long way to shoot something this large. So there are many iron pieces that were found in the area. They range from a few milligrams to 34 tons. And one mass of about 1 ton, known as Otumpa, was found in 1803. And then about a 1,400-pound portion of this mass was taken to Buenos Aires in 1813 and then donated to the British Museum. And that piece is on display. You can find pictures of it online. It has one side cut off and polished and etched, so you can see the the Widmanstatten structure, and I'll show you some of that in a second. There was another one, another large mass that weighed about 6,800 pounds called El Taco. And the largest remaining fragment of that only weighs about 2 tons. The second largest mass of about, let's see, well, it was 28,840 kilograms, so what would that be? Almost 30 tons, was named El Chaco. That was found in 1969. It was 16 feet down. They used a metal detector to find that. It was extracted in 1980, and total weight was around 37 tons. At this time, this was the second heaviest meteorite ever found. The largest one is the Hoba meteorite right there in Namibia, near Gibeon, Namibia. And you can see it there with a couple kids sitting on it. It's kind of in a park, and there are lots of meteorites in that area that are on pedestals like this, and people just come and see them. And by the way, this little piece, I'll go ahead and pass this around. This is a piece of the Gibeon meteorite fall in Namibia. This has been, of course, been cut out and etched, so you can see the what's called the Widmanstatten structure. It's an two iron nickel alloys of slightly different compositions, and they, as it cools, they exsolve from each other. So you end up getting lamellae of one composition in the other. And I'll put a handle on it.
Oh.
So,
I like
anyway,
that.
So one of the things you can do, and that's very similar to what this would be like inside of the Widmanstatten structure. And I think we have another one that's etched in the end case in this island right here where we have the native elements. More meteorites right there. Okay. Now the total weight of fragments found at Campo de Cielo is exceeds 60 tons, making it the heaviest set of such finds on Earth. So this was a good sized object that came in. A little on the other, in a different direction. In 1990, a local Argentine highway police officer foiled a plot by Richard Haig to steal El Chaco. I've heard different stories about this. One is that he had arranged to buy it from a local landowner who claimed ownership of it. The thing is that the province had taken over ownership of the property, but they have done nothing to protect anything or develop it into a tourist thing. It just kind of sat dormant. And so Haig had no idea that this guy really didn't have a right to sell it or anything. So he had this very heavy chunk of iron, carting it out with him when the police, pulled him over. They eventually let him go and sent him back to the States. The cost of meteorites, or the price obtained for meteorites today it's out of this world. It's really pretty extraordinary. I just saw a piece of the Campo de Cielo meteorite that was about this big that was being offered for sale for about $24,000. The iron's not worth that much, and these aren't that uncommon, but there's a market for them.
How much did they pay for this one to have it here?
Well, I can say that the asking price back then was somewhere around $30,000. I don't know what was actually paid for it or what the arrangement actually was. But yeah, it's you wouldn't run out and buy this off of eBay. And, anyway, what else? That is.
How much does this one weigh?
This one weighs about 500 pounds for that part. The base is about 250 pounds. So this whole thing is about 750 pounds, which is why we still have the pallet, so we don't exceed the floor loading per square inch, which is why I had to get those plates cut for under those geodes. We were doing calculations and deciding where things go because of what the architect was telling us. But all these three were a real adventure trying to get these big pieces up from the loading dock. So, overall, the composition of this is about 92.6% iron, but it also has about 6.67% nickel in it. And iron nickel alloys are kind of typical of meteorites. Even if they're a stony meteorite or one of the other kinds, they'll often contain a little bit of iron in them. This also contains about 0.4% cobalt, about 0.25% phosphorus, and 87 parts per million gallium, 400 parts per million germanium, and 3.6 parts per million iridium. You might have heard of iridium as being an indicator of a meteorite impact. You get an iridium-rich layer. It's not really rich in iridium, it's just higher than usual. We're still talking in the parts per million range. And as you go down through a horizon that the fallout from an impact has landed, if you're analyzing for iridium, you might get a spike right there. And so that's one of the ways people identify potential impacts. Now, the classification of meteorites is very simple. No, there are 3 or 4 main types, and they reflect the basically the evolution of the solar system, and when the parent body was in a collision or broke up, or maybe a piece was ejected, like from Mars or the moon, when another meteorite hit one of those bodies. And the most primitive ones, and really the most common meteorites, are called chondrites. And these have what are called chondrules in them. They're little round ball-like structures in them that they form from, chondrites are the ones that form from the primordial solar system material. Okay, so it's the dust that begins to stick together and build up. Now, if you can build up a body that is, say, more than about, somewhere around 100 miles in diameter, something like that, you can begin to generate enough heat inside from radioactive decay that it heats up quite a bit, and you can begin to get melting of components. And some of the first components that melt are the iron particles, or the iron grains. And those become liquid, whereas the silicate minerals that might be in there, and the carbon and other things that have much higher melting temperatures, they stay solid. So you start to get this kind of wet interior. And because of gravity, the molten iron or iron nickel alloy begins to sink down toward the center of the body. And eventually you end up with a molten core like of iron or iron nickel alloy like the Earth has. Or if it doesn't quite get that far, you might get large pools or bodies within the parent body, where you might have molten or partially molten material. And if that body then is broken up, maybe by another impact or something, this might have been that core material, or one of those pools of iron that was in the body. Other meteorites, we've got some on the end there that might be stony meteorites. They might have big crystals of olivine embedded in iron, or they might look like regular terrestrial stone, or some of them look a lot like igneous rocks. Those might have been parts of what would have been sort of a mantle or a silicate portion of the body. And then we also have a bunch of weird ones that have been tracked back. They think they were pieces of the Martian or lunar crust that were ejected by energetic impacts on those bodies, and they ended up landing on Earth. And what I hadn't realized before until I looked at this was almost 94% of all meteorite falls are chondrites or achondrites. Achondrites don't have chondrules, and chondrites do. And these over here are ones that have undergone some melting and differentiation, whereas these are still the pristine material. The C1 chondrite down here at the bottom is what in geochemistry we compare our analyses to see if we've had any differentiation going on. That C1 chondrite has elemental abundances that match that of the sun. Okay, and so that's thought to be the pristine solar system material. And then as things get heated up and melt, you get more differentiation. You get stony irons over here. You have silicate minerals, maybe with some iron in it. It's only 1.2% of all falls. And the iron meteorites like these account for only 5% of all falls. And that might be because a lot of people would walk right by some of these stony or stony irons without giving them a second thought. So there's, you know, I don't know what the actual relative abundances are. But if you ever have something that someone wants to know if it's a meteorite, one of the first things you do is see if a magnet will stick to it. Okay, that's not 100%, you know, certain, but things like the matte from a smelting process where you get, when they smelt, the metals go to the bottom, silicates go to the top, and then you've got this stuff in the middle called matte that might be arsenides and antimonides and bismuthides and things like that, and it's metallic and heavy and very dense, but it won't, a magnet won't stick to it. There's no iron metal up there. So, so one of the first things you want to do is see if a magnet sticks to it. Second thing that is really shows well on this are these dimples in here. They're called thumbprints or regoliths. And these are features that are eroded in the surface as it travels through the atmosphere. I think this one was estimated to have come through at a little over 14,000 miles per hour, you know, at very high temperature. And that will scour out and erode these so-called thumbprints. And so something like slag, even though it might look like it had been molten, you might see flow structures. You don't get those on meteorites. You might get a rind, a thin rind that was melted on the very surface of it, but that's going to get blown and swept off. So it's almost like you had a wet surface. The inside of the meteorite oftentimes will not have a chance to get very hot. It's going to go through the atmosphere in a matter of seconds, and out in space there, it's going to be extremely cold out there. And so in those few seconds of these fiery temperatures, they really don't heat up that much. So, you know, in the movies, you always see meteorites coming down and starting fires or sitting on the ground glowing red. No, it's not like that. I did have someone bring in a meteorite one year that, what was it? First of all, they said they saw it fall, and then they said it was hot when they picked it up. Of course, it had been sitting out in the sun. And then when I looked at the underside of it, there was lichen and there were fossils in it. So I don't think it was a meteorite. And I've also seen molten aluminum from a car fire, a lot of other things come in. But a real meteorite, the irons are pretty easy to identify. The stonies can be very difficult because some of them can look just like terrestrial igneous rocks. And I'm not even sure how you would tell them for certain. That's beyond my capabilities. But I put out a couple of these sheets of classification schemes. One's very detailed with some geochemical information for the different types. Another is simpler, just showing some of the basic types. But I don't know. It's I've never done anything with meteorites per se, but I get asked about them a lot when people come to the department with a rock that they think is a meteorite. So I've had to kind of self-educate myself as much as I can on these. So this one I brought over because it's supposed to go back in the case down here. Now the museum itself was started by Richard Sutton, who was a local dermatologist, and he was a mineral collector and fossil collector, and he was also a big supporter of UMKC. And so he donated much of the collection, not all of it, but much of the collection of specimens, as well as all the cases. And so then after he passed away, his kids gave us a bunch of the collections that or specimens he had kept. We put those in, and then more recently, when we opened up the museum in this location, we had an event out here, and then his kids came and they made additional donations, you know, as they're trying to clear out their houses and stuff like that. So it's maintaining these, at least some of them, can be an issue. Some of the sulfides tend to oxidize over the years and deteriorate. We had on the back side of the second island here, you'll see a bunch of minerals in Ziploc bags. Those are radioactive, and we put them in the bags to contain the radon that's given off. The radiation is not an issue from them, but what we found back when they started doing monitoring for radon, one of our PhD students put a carbon filter or a carbon absorbing, what is it? One of the little. It absorbs the radon base and it's activated charcoal in there. Okay, he put one of those in the case. He sent it in and immediately got a response back because where did you have this? You know, because they thought we were in great danger. But what we found was simply containing the radon in a plastic bag, Ziploc bag, took care of it because radon has a half-life of about 4.5 days, and so it's constantly decaying in there. And as long as you're not breathing the radon in where it can then decay to polonium or bismuth or something else that is not volatile, at that point it sticks in your lungs. And then as it goes through further decays, it damages the cells around it. So if you can avoid breathing the radon, you got the problem licked. We're still trying to figure out some more attractive way of taking care of those. Maybe a plexiglass container in the case, that can be sealed up, but I just haven't had time to go that far. Let's see. Some of the fossils that are over there, you might see signs that are on display elsewhere. Dick Gentile has been putting together a display for one of the main banks in the area, and he's got a number of mammoth fossils, jawbone, teeth, as well as other Pleistocene fossils from the area. He put together a display on the geology of the Kansas City area a few years ago down at the Box Gallery, and it turned out that was one of the best attended displays that they had ever had there. They even extended the display for an extra month, and so the same sponsors asked him to do something for the bank that would be there. So some of the fossils over on the other side, this case right on the end, there are Kansas City area fossils, and some of those are part of that display. I think there's another display at there's a nature center east of town, I think over in Blue Springs, that they put together a display for. We've also provided specimens from a lot of them from this case here for the Museum of Prairie Fire a couple years ago, and they had them on display for a while, and now they're back. So there's a lot of exchange going on, and any of these specimens are readily available for research use. As a mineralogist, I look at elements as the alphabet for the language of geology, and minerals are the words, and some minerals have very specific meanings in terms of the conditions they formed under. Others, like quartz, well, that's like the. You use it all over many different things. It doesn't tell us a whole lot. But then when you put them together, groups of minerals, you put words into sentences, you get new meanings. You've got an outcrop that's like a paragraph, and you put together paragraph or outcrops, studying different outcrops in different areas, you put together a whole story. And so these things are more than just pretty exotics to look at or something. There, in my mind, there's a lot here that I wish I could remember the quote that I saw last night. Someone said something to the effect that we make collections, some to provide information on things we don't know. Okay, and in other words, collections are forward-looking. They're not just a record of past activities or something. They hold away little secrets that haven't been found yet. And so that's why I'm so committed to why I work so hard. I literally had to put my foot down a few times and say, no, we're not going to put it there. We're not going to do that. And I talked with the provost and talked with Bonnie and people with facilities and stuff. And when they said, we'll meet you up here in the hallway up there, this was a tutoring area at that time. I thought we were going to put cases out there now with the star.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
And I could live with that. But then they kept walking down here and started describing how they were gonna put a wall in here and a wall in here. And we'll put it that way. And I went, okay, yeah. And then they, as part of it, they converted all the fluorescent lighting in cases to LED lighting, which was gonna be very expensive, but they just put that in. I think engineering was footing some of the bill because they wanted that space that we were in over there. And so we were really happy with how this all turned out.
Well, and before, this space was wide open, and the students would pull chairs in front of the elevator and stairwell, which is an emergency exit, obviously. It was just a nightmare trying to manage the traffic through here. And it worked fine enough for the math and science tutoring, but it wasn't ideal for them either, just because it was just wide open space.
Well, and with them putting the Missouri Historical Society archives over there, and with this, and then the Buddy archives down at the end, this whole floor became just special collections. And so it kind of, the museum fit in that way. It's not books or documents and things, but it is a special collection. So we were real pleased with how it fit in that way as well. So some of the things we want to do, I want to get pictures of every specimen and have a virtual museum online that people can look at. And we've got students that, work study students that are gradually entering things into a database. We don't have any pictures yet, but who knows when I'll get started on that. But that's what we'd like to do. And I'm almost done with the visitor's pamphlet that what's in the different cases and what's interesting about them. So I hope to get that done pretty soon. So,
Questions,
yeah.
The reason that the reason the magnet shows that it's the asteroid, is it because of the purity of the iron?
Well, iron is ferromagnetic, and it's just because it's got so much native iron in it, or metallic iron in it.
It would not be true for, you wouldn't find such deposits ordinarily on Earth.
No, not usually not. I mean, there are some minerals like magnetite that are also ferromagnetic, but native iron, to get that, there's one spot where it might be exposed out in Oregon. You have to have an extremely reducing environment, otherwise it oxidizes and turns into, to oxide minerals. The only other place you'd get it would be deep down in the earth, in the core, or maybe deeper mantle. You might find bloods of iron, down in that stuff. But yeah, native iron is not real common. I think there's a spot in Greenland where you can find it. I think on Disco Island, a place called Disco Island, and but these are places where material has been brought up from deep down in the earth. So it's brought along a little bit of native iron in the rocks.
So Jim, this one is oxidized. Is the surface is ferrous oxide?
Yeah, and once it oxidizes, it's a little bit passivated, and so you don't. I mean, if these things sit down in the soil, you'll get thicker and thicker. With moisture, it'll gradually the outer surface will flake off, and eventually the meteorite will go away. But this is big enough and impermeable enough that it's pretty resistant to oxidation and reacting with the acids in the soil and stuff.
Could you talk a little bit about these two big geodes?
Yeah. These were donated.
They're fairly new too.
These were also from Science City, and Dick Gentile managed to get hold of them, get them brought over here. These are from the southernmost part of Brazil. There are also some similar ones from nearby in northern Uruguay, I think it is. It's right along the Uruguay River. And these are formed in what are called pipe vesicles in basalt flows. Initially, you'd have the basalt flow, and gases that were coming out of the basalt would try to rise up through the flow, and of course it's cooling, getting more viscous, and eventually get trapped. You get a bubble in there, but you get this tall vertical thing. And the biggest ones of these that I've seen pictures of are about 12 feet tall. Most of them are much smaller, about that big.
Do these fit together?
Yes, yeah, it's a matched pair. And then millions of years later, as groundwater levels fluctuate, they dissolve minerals, they interact with the minerals in the basalt and weather them, and they end up some of those reactions release silica, and silica can collect in here, and as the temperature chemistry changes, you can begin to precipitate out a layer of quartz all along here. You see the white quartz all along here, and then if you get a little bit of iron and I think hydroxyl incorporated into the structure, you end up getting amethyst, which is also quartz. It just has some little bit of impurity in it. And this one's kind of interesting because right about at this height, the thickness of the shell changes. So I think what happened was initially this whole thing was below the water table and you're forming this layer over the whole thing, but then the area might have been uplifted or the water table dropped, and then now this was only about half filled with water, and the amethyst kept growing down here, and you get a much thicker band down there. And these, on the outside of these, the color of the outside and the rind that forms are typical of what locality it comes from. And so I've tracked these down to the site in southernmost Brazil. There are a number of quarries where they dig these things out of the weathered basalt.
So, but basically these are the same as the smaller geodes.
Similar, yeah. Except these are in volcanic rocks, and there are the Mexican so-called coconut geodes. I think in the middle case there are coconut geodes. Those are in volcanics down in Mexico. But the gray ones on the far end are in sedimentary rocks. And I haven't heard a really good explanation on how they form. Some people say they were originally a fossil, and the organic material as it decomposed created a gas bubble, make a round gas bubble, and then that got lined with quartz or calcite or other minerals in there. Other people, there are different explanations, but those on the end, the gray ones down there, are in sedimentary rocks, and they're from northeast Missouri, southeast Iowa, around Keokuk, and western Illinois, along the Mississippi River. And there are a number of places, including road cuts and stream beds, where you can go up there and collect those, and they have geode days in Keokuk in October. And you meet, and then they break into groups and go to different sites and collect. And some of those get to be, the size of a basketball. And other ones are real tiny. Some of the smaller ones still have water in them. And I can say from experience, it tastes kind of old. It's slightly salty, but kind of musty. I mean, it's kind of, there's nothing dangerous about it, but it's not like the water you would have for drinking. I don't know if it's in an aquifer that they pump bottled water from. Well,
You said Keokuk?
Keokuk, Iowa, very southeast corner of Iowa. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. My dad used to take us over there when I was a kid, and we'd go to the quarries and collect geodes. And I have a bucket of little ones, kind of walnut-sized ones, that I take if I go to a grade school or something. I have a little splitter. Kids can crack them open. They're the very first person to ever see the inside of that. You don't know what's going to be in it, so they can crack them open and keep them. Things like that. So.
How did the native peoples, the same thing happens with the Greenland meteorites, that the native people used that iron in weapons. How do you get it off the big rock?
Well, I don't know about getting off on it unless they found smaller pieces of it and heated them up and hammered them.
Yeah.
Something,
Once
to
they
form them.
had extracted a piece that was workable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
Knives and things.
yeah, same
They
issue.
were hammered, they weren't forged
Right.
with heat.
Yeah. And you have the same issue with native copper up in northern Michigan. Some of the local tribes up there way back made copper tools and implements, but some of the biggest chunks of native copper are actually offshore underwater in Lake Superior. And the problem is, how do you get it out? You can't lift it, it's too heavy. So people go out there with torches or saws and cut off chunks and try and bring them up. And that's a very labor intensive and costly way to do it. So, yeah, we've had pictures of little kids sitting in there, you know.
It's amazing. Wow.
Who cut it in half?
We got it that way. The miners down there will saw them. They will also sometimes add on cement or something base to them. And actually on this one you can see there are fractures that have been repaired and painted back here. So they don't always come out in one solid piece. But they keep the pieces and glue them back together.
Brian Mason at the Smithsonian worked with tektites. And, you know, there was a massive meteorite crater at the mouth of the Chesapeake.
Yeah.
And they found tektites that he theorized had come from that impact up in the Appalachians, up
Oh,
where
really?
the Sidling Hill Road cut is on Sidling
Oh, yeah,
Hill.
really?
And that's, if he was correct, I mean, that's about 300 miles.
Yeah. Well,
But
look,
of course, they're very light, glassy.
the Southeast Asian tektite deal is huge. You know, I think it hit somewhere down around Vietnam, but you find this big splash
Oh,
field.
really?
It goes hundreds of miles. So,
You don't want to be around.
no, it'd be a neat fireworks show, but what goes up has to come down. So,
Yeah.
So if you extrapolate, how the Yucatan impact, how big a splash field was that?
that was essentially a worldwide global splash field.
Yep.
You've got what was called the KT boundary.
Yep.
In
Yeah.
New Zealand and Italy and other places. And the wave from that, they say, went over Florida, clear across the peninsula. They found churned up rocks and everything from that up in quite a ways from the Gulf in Alabama. So there were some big waves that were actually some even up in South Dakota in the Badlands. There's a site there that somebody looked at. You find essentially the death horizon right there, and I thought they said that they found disturbed beds, so that would have been from waves coming up what was the interior waterway at that time that came up, say, from Texas on up into South Dakota and Montana. So it would have been a pretty spectacular impact. I'd like to watch it from the moon. Somewhere not here.
We may yet see something like that.
Yeah. Didn't we just have something come by the Earth that was closer than the moon is?
Yep.
There was one passed
Yeah.
recently.
But not as big.
Yeah.
I get spaceweather.com because I'd
Yeah.
kind of like to know if we're going to
Well, I don't think I'd want to know. I think the way to go
No.
is just boom, you're gone.
I'd kind of like to know.
But anyway, feel free to look around or whatever. If you have any questions, just give a shout.
Jim, thank you very, very
Oh,
much.
you're welcome. Thank you. I wish Dick could have been here.
Yep.
He knows more about the history of the museum and everything on that end of the room. So
we can have a sequel at some other time.
oh yeah.
I say